Ever wonder if the laws you vote for are, the ones actually being enforced? Or if maybe something else is quietly pulling the strings behind the scenes?
It's a really important question.
Yeah, and just this week, we've seen headlines highlighting how federal judges are blocking executive orders. Things like immigration, government spending.
Right. Crucial issues. And this is happening even while the Supreme Court is actually trying to get a handle on these powerful universal injunctions from lower courts. We saw that in the recent Trump v. Casa ruling.
But that's only part of the picture, isn't it? There are also these new reports exposing what some are calling a hidden pipeline for federal funding.
That's right. Taxpayer money moving through, let's say, vaguely worded appropriations to NGOs, non-governmental organizations.
And the concern, sources say, is that this might be advancing controversial agendas on issues like abortion, gender ideology, immigration, all sort of without direct accountability.
Exactly. So today we're going to take a deep dive into both of these things, these judicial actions and this indirect funding, to see how they might be impacting our constitutional republic and maybe the will of the American people.
Okay, so let's start with the courts, this idea of judicial overreach. What do the sources say is the core problem?
Well, the main concern highlighted is that some federal judges, particularly in lower courts, might be acting almost like super legislators. They're issuing these things called universal injunctions.
Okay, break that down. What exactly is a universal injunction?
Basically, it's a court order that stops a government policy across the entire country, not just for the specific people involved in the lawsuit, but everywhere.
Wow, that sounds huge.
It is. And you've got figures like Justice Neil Gorsuch stating pretty clearly that lower court judges are never free to defy a Supreme Court. And Justice Amy Coney Barrett has even questioned if these injunctions go beyond what courts are supposed to do, authority-wise.
So, a real challenge potentially to the separation of powers. When these big injunctions happen, how much do sources suggest that maybe ideology or partisanship is playing a role?
Well, that's definitely part of the critique you see in our sources. This concern about overreach often gets tangled up with the perception of partisan motives.
How so?
Critics point to examples like reports about Judge Juan Merchant's financial ties to Democratic campaigns during a Trump trial, or another judge, John McConnell Jr., being labeled a staunch leftist.
Okay.
Now, whether those labels are fair or not isn't the point here, but these examples are used to fuel the argument that maybe some judicial actions are driven by ideology, especially when, say, judges appointed by one party seem to frequently block actions from an administration of the other party.
And the impact of this goes beyond just specific cases, right? It seems like it can directly block what the executive branch is trying to do.
Absolutely. We've seen reports of judges blocking all sorts of initiatives, things like freezing DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or halting deportations of certain groups. There was criticism directed at Judge James Boasberg, for instance, for stopping the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members.
So this is causing enough concern that Congress is actually looking at it.
Yes, exactly. Concerns are apparently high enough that measures like the No Rogue Rulings Act and the Judicial Relief Clarification Act of 2025 have been introduced.
And what do those aim to do?
They're trying to limit these nationwide injunctions and sort of clarify the court's roles. It reflects this growing worry that maybe the judiciary is sometimes stepping outside its bounds.
Okay, so that's the judicial side. Let's pivot to this other mechanism you mentioned, the hidden pipeline of funding. How does that work? How does taxpayer money get to these NGOs indirectly?
It's quite a process, according to the reports. It starts with Congress allocating funds pretty broadly to federal agencies.
Okay, big pots of money.
Right. Then the agencies themselves, often led by political appointees who align with the current administration, have a lot of discretion in choosing which NGOs get grants.
So the decision is made further down the line.
Exactly. And here's the key part. The concept of fungibility of funds.
Fungibility, meaning money can be swapped around.
Precisely. So think of it like this. An NGO might get a federal grant for something perfectly legitimate, say, covering rent or administrative costs.
Okay.
But because that federal money covers those basic costs, it frees up the NGO's other money donations, other revenue to be spent on activities that federal grants might not be allowed to cover directly. Things like political lobbying or maybe controversial services.
I see. So the federal dollars enable the other spending, even if they don't directly pay for it.
Yes, reports describe it almost like a form of political money laundering, giving a layer of plausible deniability.
And are there specific examples of how this plays out? You mentioned agencies using certain language.
Yeah, sources allege that agencies like HHS or SAMHSA, that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, might use language like equity and inclusion in their grant requirements.
To what end?
Well, critics claim this helps channel funds to organizations that promote specific agendas like gender transitions for minors or what's termed gender-affirming care.
And it applies elsewhere, too, like immigration or foreign aid.
Definitely. Reports mention the Office of Population Affairs increasing grants to Planned Parenthood affiliates for Title X family planning services. Critics argue this indirectly supports abortion services by covering other costs, even though Title X funds can't directly pay for abortions.
Okay.
On immigration, you see DHS awarding contracts to NGOs, like Catholic charities. Critics allege these groups then help facilitate mass entry policies by coordinating transport and resettlement for migrants. And even with foreign aid, USAID has funded NGOs in Palestinian territories, which has led to criticism about potential indirect support for anti-Israel groups.
So the argument is that this funding happens, but it doesn't necessarily align with what the public actually wants.
That's the core criticism. When you look at polls, for instance, showing 68% of Americans supporting mass deportations of illegal immigrants, or strong majorities opposing late-term abortion or gender transitions for minors,
Right.
critics argue this funding pipeline essentially allows policies that might be unpopular to move forward anyway, kind of bypassing public opinion and direct legislative approval. It raises real questions about accountability.
So wrapping this up, we've looked at these two powerful forces, judicial actions, sometimes seen as activism, and this sort of hidden pipeline for funding. Both seem to challenge, in different ways, how we think about democratic governance and accountability.
They really do. They highlight areas where policy might be shaped quite significantly by unelected officials or through complex funding streams that aren't always transparent.
It leaves us with a pretty big question then, doesn't it? In a system where unelected judges can potentially set nationwide policy and taxpayer money might indirectly support agendas that many citizens oppose, what steps might be needed to ensure our government truly reflects the will of the people?
That's the critical question to consider moving forward. How do we maintain those checks and balances and ensure genuine accountability?